Nourishment. Nourishment is a core theme for anyone presuming to incarnate as a mammal. In fact, the word mammal derives from the mammary glands that produce mother's milk. Part of the definition of being a mammal is that we begin life receiving nourishment from another mammal's body. We are part of a vast food chain, many parts invisible to our ordinary perception, and nourishment, in many senses, is crucial to our incarnation. The first and most obvious aspect of nourishment is the food we eat. Food is a part of the external universe that we take into our bodies and out of which we fuel and form our bodies. Depending on your version of physics, matter is congealed energy, information, and consciousness. All food is a stepping down or transduction of solar energy. Plants use solar energy and convert it, step it down into carbohydrates, protein, and fat. Food closer to the original sunlight, such as an orange we just pulled from a tree, has a bioenergetic vitality not found in a factory-fresh, food-like substance wrapped in cellophane at the gas station. Forgot to turn on my blue lights. Rudolf Steiner said that most people couldn't become conscious past a certain point because they ate a diet that was too inferior to support a higher state of consciousness. Sorry, I gotta fix the lighting here. All right, there we go. The food we choose to nourish ourselves with affects us on every level, from the cellular to the spiritual. Michael Pollan has boiled his nutritional advice down to a single sentence. Eat food, mostly plants, not too much. Pollan suggests we eat food and not what he calls, quite incisively, food-like substances. So here, if you look at the photo in the text of the card, you'll see an ad for Nutrisystems products, if that company even exists anymore, and they call it real food for real people. And then you will see like the little foil packets and so forth of what real food looks like according to Nutrisystem. What is sold as, quote, real food is often a food-like substance, a laboratory concoction deceptively packaged and marketed. Actual real food is food that allows you to visibly recognize the plants or animals it's sourced from. Food is not the only thing we nourish ourselves with. As social mammals, we need to be nourished by relationships, or we become non-viable. We also nourish ourselves with places, things, and culture, movies, music, books, events, journeys, and so forth. All of these are foods or medicines entering our inner cauldron, and each exists somewhere in the spectrum of nourishing to toxic. Like right now, you are nourishing yourself, for better or worse, with a Zap Oracle YouTube card video. Okay, I'm hoping that's good nourishment. But you could instead be nourishing yourself with a first-person shooter video game or an Pornhub. It's up to you to discern which of these potential forms of online nourishment further your development as a soul. So there are many different types of things that are entering our cauldron and that can be considered nourishment, from foods, cultural products, relationships, events, travel, and so forth. But all of this is still only covering the passive aspect of nourishment. The active inflection of nourishment concerns the question, what and on whom do we nourish? We cannot just be eaters and consumers of various forms of nourishment. We must also be nourishers. For example, a young man summarizing his life philosophy a few years ago told me, I just want to take a big bite out of life. And I pointed out to him, so that's your legacy, will be a series of bite holes. Okay? There's no talk in that philosophy about putting anything back into life, in other words. So we want to ask ourselves that key question: on what and on whom do you bestow your nourishment, which can be your cash, your sexual chi, your time, attention, love, resources of any kind? If you have trouble answering that question, you're not being honest with yourself. What you nourish is what you spend time on, what you spend your money on, your sexual chi, your bodily, emotional, cognitive, and spiritual energies. What you choose to nourish, like what you nourish yourself with, exists on a spectrum of nourishing to toxic. We can spend our time and money supporting internet porn sites, or we can spend our time helping those who have the potential and will to become conscious. The spectrum of people we could choose to nourish ranges from, on the dark end, greedy black hole type people who will take you for whatever you're worth and use the energy they are given for their insatiable appetites, generating collateral damage in the process. On the other side of the spectrum, the most force-multiplying, synergistic, and symbiotic choice for bestowing nourishment is on those who are themselves capable of being illumined, because through them you help to illumine the world. As is pointed out in hexagram 27 of the I Ching, providing nourishment, you can tell whether a person is inferior or superior based on what they choose to nourish themselves with and on what or on whom they choose to bestow their nourishment. The I Ching also warns us not to indulge what it calls nourishment that does not nourish. We should minimize entertainment eating and maximize nutritious eating, as an example. So here it is from the Wilhelm Baines, the most classic translation of the I Ching. He who seeks nourishment that does not nourish reels from desire to gratification, and in gratification craves desire. Mad pursuit of pleasure for the satisfaction of the senses never brings one to the goal. One should never follow this path, for nothing good can come of it. So here's a few more words on food-related nutrition from the Zap Oracle card Survivor, which is sort of like my survival manual. It's linked in the body of the text there, within the Zap Oracle. Another version of the card is "Come with me if you want to live," and has a picture of the Terminator 2. Few things are as likely to wreck the quality and quantity of your life than poor nutrition. Industrial food scientists are well aware that a fat-sugar-salt combo is as addictive as cocaine, and use that trio to enslave people to toxic food-like substances. Though much of the research on human nutrition is highly flawed and unreliable, there is no controversy about SAD, the standard American diet, which is now the standard in much of the world, being highly toxic. Avoid foods that make health claims. They're usually highly contrived food-like substances with long ingredient lists. And if you check the body of the card, you see an ad for Pop-Tarts that advertises that it's a good source of 8 vitamins and minerals. We've seen this with a lot of breakfast cereals. They just ground up some chemical vitamins and threw them in there along with the list of 25 different chemistry set-like ingredients. Avoid anything that says low fat. That only means that they took out the healthier calories and replaced them with sugar or high fructose corn syrup. In fact, the obesity epidemic seemed to begin with the low-fat movement, because we're much better off getting our calories from fats, healthy fats especially, than from sugars. Be wary of any food products that use the word natural on the packaging, meaning that they're not organic and probably have chemical pesticide residue, and avoid anything that has in quotes, natural flavors in the ingredients list. Natural flavors. That must be an extract of the natural flavor plant. Notice that natural flavors doesn't specify any ingredient. So what exactly is it? Simple. According to the FDA, natural flavor means the term natural flavor or natural flavoring means the essential oil, oleoresin, essence or extractive protein hydrolysate, distillate, or any product of roasting, heating, or enzyme myelosis which contains the flavoring constituents derived from a spice, fruit or fruit juice, vegetable or vegetable juice, edible yeast, herb, bark, bud, root, leaf, or similar plant material, meat, seafood, poultry, eggs, dairy products, or fermentation products thereof, whose significant function in food is flavoring rather than nutritional. In other words, the definition is a toxic word salad of legalese and food technology jargon, creating a definition expansive enough that tanker cars filled with factory-fresh natural flavors pass through it every day. Although much nutritional research is of very poor quality, the basics are not in dispute, but there is also no such thing as the one perfect diet for all people. People tend toward ideological dietary paradigms and double down on those with religious intensity. But the evidence is that people can thrive on highly divergent diets, and you can see the book Diet Cults. So, I've known many such and fallen into it myself, diet ideologues. So first of all, some people have, it's kind of, the human psychology is primed toward it because going back to time immemorial, cultural identity, think of all those ethnic cuisines, was often determined by local food preferences. And so then more recently, people turn those into food ideologies and are like raw foodists, for example. Don't put the flame of death to your food, and cooking destroys the enzymes in your food, which sounds great until you realize actually so do stomach acids. And so we have all these. I would have preferred to believe that being a vegetarian or vegan was the nutritionally superior diet. Ethically, I still believe that, but it's not necessarily backed up by science. Many diets can be healthy. You can have Inuits, Eskimos, who eat a diet that's mostly just fat and protein, and they're fine. And then you can have Aboriginal Hawaiians who eat a diet that's mostly carbs, and they're fine. Of course, both groups, can quickly become obese if they start eating anything like the standard American diet. Rudolf Steiner points out another aspect of nourishment. This is on a completely different angle on the subject, and that's the possibility of our becoming food for parasitic entities as reported by almost every culture across time. Because we just presume that we're at the top of the food chain, which may be very convenient for those who may actually be at the top of the food chain. Now, this sounds like a very extravagant, bizarre claim to there's a vast category of writings on my website. Just go to the category section of the site, and it's called Mind Parasites. It may sound a bit fantastical, but I make a rational case for it in the introductory essay or YouTube called Mind Parasites, Energy Parasites, and Vampires. And, well, I'll just make the very quick case for it right now, because otherwise it can sound like somebody can make a gotcha moment of like, oh, he's talking about, entities at the top of the food chain. Really, to have a little humility about it, it's really only one culture, scientific materialism, that doesn't say this, as far as I know. And we are perfectly capable of missing a whole dimension of life. For example, every culture, including Western European scientific culture, was completely clueless, not that we had much science at that point, was completely clueless about the whole microbiological domain of life until in the 1700s, a Dutch shopkeeper, he had a curtain shop and had well-made optics to do thread counts in fabrics. His name was A.V. Leeuwenhoek, and he was ground the first lenses that were good enough to make a primitive microscope and able to see an amoeba, which is a relative giant of the microbiological world. And then suddenly we discovered this thing that would have gotten you burnt at the stake in the 1600s or earlier, that there was this whole fantastic, bizarre cryptozoology of animals invisible to the naked eye. And not only were they all around us and on all our food and everywhere, they were us. They are us. Our bodies are basically a cooperative network of 40 trillion of these tiny little critters, right? But we were clueless about that until this one Dutch shopkeeper came along. Surgeons were washing their hands after surgery, but not before. So now we have the microbiological realm, the macrobiological realm. Nobody disputes those two realms, but there's a third realm that every culture except scientific materialism, scientism, identified, which is a realm of, let's call them energetic organisms, not necessarily based on organic chemistry. And what we would find in that domain of life, like we find in the micro and macrobiological domains of life, is certain classic relationships of energetic transaction, like predation, symbiosis, my favorite, and perhaps the most common, parasitism, where something is feeding off the life of something else, but not killing it outright like a predator does. According to National Geographic, parasites outnumber all other species in the macrobiological realm 4 or 5 to 1. In the microbiological realm, it may be even greater because all viruses are classed as parasites. So, you can read that essay or you listen to that YouTube and many of my other related documents to try and put that into a more rational framework. But here's Rudolf Steiner speaking in 1907. There are beings in the spiritual realms for whom anxiety and fear emanating from human beings offer welcome food. When humans have no anxiety and fear, then these creatures starve. People not yet sufficiently convinced of this statement could understand it to be meant comparatively only. But for those who are familiar with this phenomenon, it is a reality. If fear and anxiety radiate from people and they break out in panic, then these creatures find welcome nutrition and they become more and more powerful. These beings are hostile towards humanity. Everything that feeds on negative feelings, on anxiety, fear, and superstition, despair, or doubt are in reality hostile forces in supersensible worlds, launching cruel attacks on human beings while they are being fed. And by the way, you could find also more on this perspective in my sci-fi epic, Parallel Journeys, where this topic is explored. This is Steiner continuing. Therefore, it is above all necessary to begin with that the person who enters the spiritual world overcome fear, feelings of helplessness, despair, and anxiety. Otherwise, you become, this is me talking again, at what Gurdjieff calls food for the moon. But these are exactly the feelings that belong to contemporary culture and materialism, because it estranges people from the spiritual world. It is especially suited to evoke hopelessness and fear of the unknown in people, thereby calling up the above-mentioned hostile forces against them. And the source from this, translated from the German, was Rudolf Steiner, speaking in Berlin on December 12th of 1907. And again, you can follow up on that in the Mind Parasite category of the zaporacle.com website. You'll see that telescope-like navigator. Hit the category button, and you'll see many interesting categories, including mind parasites. So once again, everything about human incarnation can be seen as an inflection of nourishment. There's everything that you can't exist without being nourished. You were nourished within your mother's body. After you exited a mother's body, you were likely nourished by mother's milk, if not formula, which would be more the food-like substance version of mother's milk and not advisable except as an emergency means. And then you would continue to be a human being by frequently nourishing yourself with matter imbibed from the universe in the form of food, liquids, and sometimes more dubiously as aerosols like smokes and vapes and pills and potions and so forth. But also you would be nourishing yourself with relationships. None of us could survive or remain sane without that nourishment. And also with all kinds of cultural impressions and products like movies, games, books, oracles, and so forth. And then we shift the inflection to consider yourself as a source of nourishment, and how worthy are the objects or persons that you bestow nourishment on, and how well do you nourish them. And then we also added to that the idea that we are, as a species, may be nourishment to microbial parasites like viruses, macrobiological parasites like mosquitoes. And remember that many parasites themselves contain parasites. That's how we get malaria. It's a microbial parasite inside another parasite, the mosquito. And mosquitoes have killed more people than all wars by far. And but we cannot assume that there may not be other species that our science has not yet detected that may exist above us on the food chain and may account for some of the over-the-top malevolent aspects of human behavior. See my writings on that subject. So consider this an auspicious time to think about every one of these angles on nourishment. And before you nourish yourself with something, or nourish others in a good or bad way, ask yourself if you'll remember it well on your deathbed. And if everybody received nourishment in this way or gave nourishment in this way, would it serve the greater good or not?